aircraft that you see in a lot of movies. The Black Hawk was developed to replace that, and it's primarily what we call a utility helicopter, meaning you use it to carry troops into battle, or you use it to carry supplies, or you use it to perform a medevac mission to evacuate wounded. You can use it as what we call a command and control platform, where you put a commander in it, and he has radios, or she has radios, and then they control the battle from it. So that's why they call it utility, because there are so many different things you can do with it. We had actually armed ours also and turned it into an attack helicopter as well. So it did pretty much everything you can do with a helicopter, and I believe, because of the design of the aircraft, I'm here today. If it didn't have some of the safety features that it has, I probably would not have survived that crash.
You know, you mentioned the Army Survival School before. Talk about that and what you learned in that experience.
Well, I always considered that school to be second only to flight school with regard to how valuable it was for me in my career. It's one of those schools, I suppose, that most people would avoid altogether if they could. It's very demanding training. You go through an evasion phase where you don't eat for several days, and then you go into a POW camp scenario where you're actually in a camp and you're treated as a prisoner and you're immersed completely. There are role players and nobody breaks character. When you talk about things that have occurred lately in Abu Ghraib, I mean, you go through sensory deprivation, you're humiliated. All those things are actually done in training to us.
So it's pretty intense.
It is, and in fact, so intense that, you know, when people go for days without sleep, like we did, your brain starts to do funny things, and it's different for everyone. But I believe that there were people that after the second day in that camp in training started to think that this might be real. I mean, they really did. They get to that point where this has gone beyond what I thought training was supposed to be like, and that's the objective, is to try to get you as close as possible to the real thing, because hands down, it is the most challenging experience a service person will ever go through. There's nothing that comes close.
And what do they tell you to say to your captors? I mean, you know, you see in the movies how they say, you know, name, rank, and serial number, whatever that means.
Right. Well, you know, that was the standard before Vietnam, and it's one of the things that's really changed over the past 30 years or so. And it came as a result of lessons learned in Vietnam, prolonged captivity of 5 years, 7 years, some periods of time that are unimaginable even for me who's been there. And I think in the aftermath, former POWs realized you can't go 7 years saying those four things. So it's really an unrealistic standard. So they developed some techniques to allow you to still stay within what we call the code of conduct. That's what you were referring to. It's called the code of conduct, that sets the standard for your behavior and how you act in captivity. So they developed these training courses that gave you the tools to comply with the code of conduct, but were more realistic than saying you can only say four things for, you know, however long you're held captive. And I believe, again, that it was instrumental in my survival, because I used the techniques. They worked perfectly in my scenario, and I was able to achieve the results that I wanted to by using those techniques.
Well, part of your survival was surviving from your injuries, which were pretty severe. Did they give you any kind of medical attention?
They did. It was about 30 hours into it when the doctor visited me for the first time, and he was genuine. He spoke fairly good English. He actually had told me he had gone to school, to medical school at USC, of all places. And the problem that he had is that he just finished treating 1,500 casualties on their side, along with 300 to 500 dead, at the end of what's been a civil war that's gone on for 10 years. So there wasn't a lot left in his, what I call his blue tackle box. I mean, he had nothing in there. There was aspirin, gauze, and betadine solution was all he had. So he had the will, but not the means, and he did what he could, but aspirin doesn't do much for those kind of injuries.
But them sending you a doctor, didn't that say to you that, okay, they want me to survive, they want me to live?
Oh, and I believe they did. I mean, they did want me alive. And and I believe that his efforts were genuine. The one thing you have to be careful about in captivity is there are techniques that the enemy can use, which is part of what our training involves, on how to manipulate you psychologically. And again, this is a lot of what's been going on in Abu Ghraib, and it isn't necessarily the focus of our discussion tonight, but there are lots of techniques that are used to try to get the desired result, which is information. So these techniques, we're trained on how to identify those techniques and what we should do to protect ourselves from being exploited by these techniques. And one of the techniques is to befriend you, because the thought process there is you can get information by being nice to people sometimes versus doing what they call the hard sell technique. So you got to keep your guard up all the time, and I believe he was genuine, and I to this day believe he was genuine, but there was still a voice in the back of my head saying, don't get too comfortable with this guy, because you just don't know.
Was there any point during your captivity where you despaired? I mean, how did you keep your hopes up?
There were lots of times. Certainly as the names of my fallen comrades came out over the radio, that's the toughest thing, I think, knowing that your friends have lost their lives. When you get that information, there's very few people that aren't emotionally affected by that, especially when you're tired and you're injured and you're isolated and alone and concerned for your own well-being. It was those were low points for sure. There was one particular time when they left me in an alleyway in the back of a vehicle, and I thought they had abandoned me. So there was almost panic on my part at that point, because I knew what the mob was like, and I thought, oh, okay, they've done the video, they told the world they have me, and now I'm not of any value to them anymore, so they've abandoned me. And there was a few fleeting moments of panic that occurred during that sequence as well.
Now, why did they do a video of you? What was the purpose of that?
Well, it goes back to the hearts and minds of the people. What they're trying to get us as Americans to do is condemn the mission. I mean, that's what they want to hear. And they try to coerce you into saying it by saying, if you just tell us what we want you to say, we'll get the doctor in here, or you'll survive this, and we'll get you back to your family. And that's what makes being a prisoner of war so challenging, because you're torn. You're torn between wanting to survive, which is, I believe, a part of all of us. I believe we all have a strong desire to survive, in an extremely threatening situation where they're telling you they're going to kill you, and they've proven that they will by killing your comrades. So you've got this extraordinarily dangerous threat there, but you don't want to give into it completely and just give them what they want, because you also have this loyalty to your service and your country and all the things that you raised your right hand and said you would do. So you've got to find that balance point in the middle, and some people cave in completely, and I don't criticize them for that, because I believe everyone has a breaking point. I think you can break anyone. If people don't believe that, I would challenge them to experience some of the things that POWs have experienced over history. I believe truly that everyone has a breaking point, so I don't criticize people who break. I just thank God that I had been given the tools to figure out how to make it through this maze without violating my honor and the code of conduct, yet still successfully answer the questions from their perspective.
What did you end up saying on that videotape?
Well, again, the main things that they want to hear are, this mission is wrong, we shouldn't be here, we need to pull out now. That's what they want to hear. I mean, that would be, a hole-in-one for them in that particular scenario. So that's really what they're after. They wanted me to say we were killing people all day long during this mission, and I managed to weave my way around that. The bottom line was the questions that ended up on all the networks were, you kill the people innocent, were the exact words of the interrogator. And I said, innocent people being killed is not good, which
right
is as neutral as it comes. And again, that's a general idea of the technique that we're supposed to use when you're faced with a question like that, if you answer at all. The other question was,